Welcome, everyone, to this Good Leadership Podcast. My name is Charles Good, your host and the president of the Institute for Management Studies. This podcast is designed to provide you with actionable insights and tools that you can use from discussing the research, stories, and background from recognized experts and practitioners to accelerate your impact in your current role. My goal is what we've discussed today will be immediately actionable and useful to you, and I'd love to hear your comments for this episode about what you're planning on implementing. This is a special edition of the podcast where I'm talking to Suresh Radhakrishnan, who is an HR strategic partner with the Metropolitan Water District in Los Angeles, one of our current IMS members. He has been with Metropolitan Water for nearly 25 years in various capacities in its organizational and training departments, along with being a senior adjunct faculty member with the University of Laverne in their College of Business programs. Thank you for joining me today, Suresh.
My pleasure, Charles. It's always fun to work with IMS. Looking forward to this.
We have known each other for quite some time now, but I'd love for you to provide our listeners with some of the highlights of your background, especially what got you interested in this industry.
Sure. So I came to America at the age of 18 on a cultural exchange program scholarship, partly, I think, because they thought they were getting a semi-professional football player. It turned out I played soccer. But I ended up living in Alabama, getting my bachelor's and my master's degrees in human resources management, marketing, and finance. And then had a real passion for human resources management. But my first job was in sales and finance with MetLife. And then made the mistake of coming out to visit Southern California and saw the sunny weather and thought that there was a better chance for me to break into human resources because that's where my heart was, my passion was. And I ended up moving, packing my stuff and driving across the country, moved to Southern California in 1988 and ended up getting a job with LA Department of Water and Power. So got into the water business, and it was in training and developing managers and facilitating quality circles, total quality management back in those days. So it was really where my passion was. That's what I got into. And over the last 30 years or so, 33 years, who's counting, I have been in human resources management. And very interesting, early on in my career at LADWP, they were also a member of IMS. And I got the opportunity to attend some classes, some training, full day sessions back in the day when we used to do that. And the topics were fantastic. And I got hooked. I kept looking forward to when the next session would come. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Thank you. Well, you've been in the industry for quite some time now. What do you think are some of the key trends and disruptors in the L&D industry in the last year?
Well, the biggest change, I think, happened in the last couple of years. Remote work has become the mainstay. Myself and my wife, who's an engineer, we got stuck in India for 6 months at the beginning of COVID. And it took about 2 or 3 weeks for us to realize this is long-term and we had to do something. And we ended up actually, our crack IT team at MWD set us up to where we could work from India. So we were logging in at 7 p.m. Indian time, which was 6:30 a.m. in Southern California, and working through the night. And little did we realize that this is going to be what the trend is for the future. Now we have employees who come into work 2 days a week in the office and working remotely the rest of the time. But in all industries, I think you're seeing that's a big one. Remote work, flexibility, having the technology available to do all that. The way I see it, there are 4 other things. One is the battle for talent. There's a huge dearth of people in a lot of technical fields, specialized fields. And with remote work again coming in, people are free to move and work from anywhere. So the battle for talent is heating up really strongly. Unemployment is very low. So companies are having a tough time finding the right people for the right job and then keeping them long term, which leads to the third challenge, which is employee engagement and motivation. What are the kind of things that managers can do to keep their employees engaged, to keep motivating them, to manage them properly, and even lead? I think this is where organizations like IMS provide a great service. I think that's where we need to look to. The fourth thing is innovation and technology. With all the technological changes, electric power, connectivity, Wi-Fi, ability to work from anywhere at any time, and then all the other technologies that are available that make us more efficient. So innovation and technology, I think, is a major challenge. And then last but not least is then how does leadership and management change with those times. I think that's the biggest challenge. The role of the manager is changing tremendously with remote work. The role of the manager is changing tremendously with all the technology that's available. How many people do you need? I mean, at the US Open recently, you had Hawkeye calling all the line, making all the line calls. That's 140 line umpires that don't have work anymore. But you got a much more efficient system. And then you got to work with that technology and still keep everything going. So the challenge for leaders and managers to be really good managers, but then also lead and see the opportunities and still keep people engaged. That I think is a huge challenge.
Those are all very important. Thank you for providing me that such a definitive list on those. I'd like to go and connect those kind of with Metropolitan Water. So if you could give us some background on the learning culture at Metropolitan Water and some of the strategies you're using to build a leadership pipeline.
Absolutely. And I think we have discussed this a lot at IMS over the years as being part of the advisory committee or planning meetings on what topics to bring in and so forth. And a lot of what we are doing dovetails with what IMS is doing, or IMS is doing things that really support us in these efforts. The number one priority for Metropolitan was to ensure effective people management, which means you had to have managers who were well trained in the policies, the procedures, how to create a good employee experience. How do you manage, evaluate, engage and motivate employees? How do you develop them? How do you move them up to the next level? How do you recognize them and so forth? The second big thing was to prepare for the future workforce, recognizing this is probably the last, 5 years ago, when we said, the working roles are changing. The way that we work is changing. Little did we know how much it would change, but preparing for the future workforce. So how do you develop current employees to move into management roles and leadership roles? How do you motivate or prepare mid-level managers to move into leadership roles and so forth? So preparing for the future workforce was a huge thing. And the third thing, I think, Charles, was it's very counterproductive and non-collaborative to completely be in this project management approach without thinking about the overall collaboration. You could be in your silo doing your thing very well, but not recognizing what's happening across in other places. There's LADWP wants to have fully green power by 2035, and they're 42% of the way there. When that happens, it changes the nature of the work. What about water, recycling, desalination, chemicals? We have to test for the quality of the water and so forth. So it can be counterproductive to be in that little project management bubble and think that you're doing well with just your stuff. So we came up with an approach we think is working, which is a very tiered approach. So at the very bottom, you have employees who are very well trained in basic things that they need to do, how to use the technology, Microsoft Office suite, and all the applications that they use to get their work done. How is word processing happening? All those different things, the mandatory classes that they need to attend from a safety standpoint, from getting along with their coworker standpoint and so forth. But beyond that, once they are well trained in the basics, how do you then get some of them who are interested and motivated to move into management? And for that, we came up with what we call the Management Academy. This is where we actually bring in select employees who apply, volunteer, to come in and be in a cohort being trained over a 10-month period, 1 day a week, 1 day a month, learning to become managers and kind of getting a realistic expectation or understanding of what management is all about. What does it take to become a manager? And the interesting thing we found, Charles, was out of the first cohort of 28 people, I think we had, about 11 of them moved into management roles within about 6 months to a year after they completed the academy. But the most interesting thing for me, or fascinating thing for me, was the 6 people who came back and said, I don't ever want to be a manager. I see what it takes to be a manager. That's not me. Otherwise, they would sit around thinking, I'm not getting promoted. I want to be a manager and I'm not making more money because I'm not becoming a manager. And they realize that's not what they want to do. That's not their cup of tea. So they can focus on the technical side and do extremely well and still be productive and useful. So beyond the Management Academy, we set up what we call a management university, Metropolitan Management University, for entry-level managers. So the managers are taught about all the things they need to do to be successful once they get the job as a manager. How do they plan the work? How do they schedule things? How do they interact and network with other parts of the organization? And of course, motivating employees, dealing with disciplinary issues, managing performance, everything that it takes to be successful as a manager was taught in the Met Management University. And then we had a graduate level of Met Management University. That was for team managers who wanted to become managers of managers. So it's a whole different set of curriculum that they went through that taught them to become a manager as a teacher, getting 360 feedback to understand their own emotional EQ, emotional intelligence, and how do they master communication styles? What is their style of communication? What do they need to adjust to be able to communicate with other people? We call it the Colors program. It's from Agreement Dynamics, and it's called Success Signals. Then we also had other opportunities for them to take classes through Degreed or Pathways, Jana.com, and others. And one of the things we built into this mid-level and next level of Management Graduate University was telling managers, offering managers an opportunity to attend the Institute of Management Studies curriculum. So we made it a requirement at the Management University level for team managers to attend at least 2 sessions of IMS every year. They had the option, they could pick a few more, but we made it a requirement for them to attend at least 2 of their choice. They could look through the schedule and pick topics that were useful for them, that they needed help in, or sometimes we'd recommend something for some people who we thought would benefit from a particular course or curriculum. And then beyond that, these are still in the works and in different forms of development, is the Senior Leadership Development Program. So once you become a managers, then how do you become a manager at the group level, so kind of executive level, where you're actually responsible for more strategy and planning and problem solving and so forth. And then last but not least is executive development, where people who have the potential, high potential people who can move into executive levels get to be on a job rotation, shadow an executive and see what their day is like, and then actually get temporary assignments to some other organization where they work for within Metropolitan, of course. We're 1,800 people. Go and work in some other area and figure out whether that's your size. And some people have moved on and moved up into executive management.
Thank you, Suresh, for providing that detailed framework of that tiered approach and what Metropolitan Water is doing and how IMS has been incorporated in that process. I'd like to get a little bit more into how has IMS in any tangible ways really helped in this process? And has it differentiated itself from other partners you're using in terms of the offerings it provides or the impact that it has on leaders at Metropolitan Water?
Sure. But over the last 3 years, one of the things that's been topic everywhere is, diversity and inclusion and the Me Too movement and so forth. So we've had also a strong focus on increasing diversity, especially in the ranks of management and leadership, but in non-traditional fields as well. So many of the topics that have come through from IMS with people like Dr. Jean Porter or Ann Tardy and others have been about women in the workplace, mentoring. How do we leverage those skills? How do we leverage those opportunities to get more women and minorities involved in different levels of management and different areas of work? So some of those topics in IMS have been extremely useful for us. Some of them, we call them our regulars to IMS. They just keep waiting and looking for those topics to come up and they want to be there. When we were doing IMS sessions, which were full days, that was a good way of them to get away from the workplace and just focus on their own development. And we presented to them as, this is for you. This is a day that you take. And if you do it 2 days a year for your own personal development, and many managers have embraced that, and they go to those IMS sessions to really soak in and learn a topic. They're usually hearing from somebody who wrote a book on the topic, like I mentioned earlier. And when they come back, they're extremely motivated. We ask them to share that information with others in the management core or even with their own team. And so they bring back, and I usually challenge them to come back with 3 keepers from every session. What are 3 things that you can use within the next 72 hours? How can you start implementing that? Most of the IMS presenters and speakers also give people tools. And I think some of the follow-up opportunities available through IMS from Athena and others, and it keeps them, looking at, okay, what else can I don't just go to a session and then it's forgotten, or there's a booklet sitting on the shelf that you never pick up and look at. versus actually coming back and you get a reminder in a week, you get a reminder in a month, you've got access to some additional information for some time. So they can go back and take some of those things and use it. And I've definitely heard from many managers that I work with, that I coach or plan or do strategic planning with, come back and said, I got a couple of things that I'm actually using now when I sit down with an employee to do a performance session or a performance evaluation session, or trying to motivate them or trying to deal with a difficult employee. So the topics lend themselves to actual practical things that they can bring back to the workplace and implement within the next 72 hours, like I challenge them to. But if not within the next month or so, they still get these little pings from you or whoever you delegate it to, Charles, and they actually use that. I think that's been a very useful way of keeping it in the forefront and using the tools that they learn.
Thank you. And you're right. IMS does a lot of that. That's one of our differentiators where we work with member organizations like Metropolitan Water to identify topics that are in demand, that are relevant and timely for them. And we make sure that the learning happens over a period of time with constant reminders, different ways to interact, because our number one goal is to get people to start using it, to start applying it right away and providing information structured in such a way where they have practiced those skills, right? Where they're able to ask those questions so they can really see that impact right away in their jobs, hopefully the next day. Is there a story that you have from your personal experience going to an IMS session, or one that you could share from someone else that really speaks to the impact of an IMS program in their daily workflow?
Sure. But, my personal experience, which actually has touched a lot of people at Metropolitan, several years ago, you had Ann Tardy, who's a lawyer, a PhD, bicyclist. I mean, she's jack of all trades and so full of energy. But she did a session with us talking about employee engagement and mentoring and so forth. And over the last 3 or 4 years, we have partnered with Ann Tardy to set up a mentoring program within our engineering group. And that's now kind of, I call it the barbecue effect. Hey, what's engineering doing over there that's so helpful? Or people seem to be so motivated. People are promoting, women are moving up in the organization and so forth. And it's a barbecue effect, like, oh, something smells good on the other side of the fence. So they're barbecuing. Maybe I'll do one too. And so other parts of the organizations have also jumped on board and want to have mentoring programs and such. Plus, when you go to those IMS sessions in person, especially, you got to meet other people from other companies and realize that we're government, they're private, they're for profit, we're nonprofit, but we all have kind of very similar challenges when it comes to motivation and being a good manager or leading or communication issues. And we get to share a lot of information and meet people who then become friends with you on LinkedIn or whatever. And you get to share information. You get to build on things that they're working on. They get pieces from it. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. So IMS has become kind of a community in Southern California, at least, for the many companies that were and are still a part of IMS. There's a lot of networking that happens after IMS happens, and you guys never hear about it, but we do. We connect and we make contact, and people find jobs, recommendations, references, and even additional learning that continues to go on. So it's a continuous learning that kind of gets kicked off through IMS in many ways.
Thank you, Suresh, for sharing it. And you're right, the networking aspect of membership is so important to many of our member organizations regionally. And now that we've gone virtual for the entire country and all of our regions that we have in North America. And then I loved how you stated also that with the private programs, IMS is really doing a lot more of the private work where we go into an individual company with one of our great educators and take that IMS approach and make it even drive further impact and behavior change as we go into the companies to really speak to their individual learning culture and need. Thank you so much for your time today and agreeing to be interviewed and sharing some insights from your vast experience and expertise and all the things that are happening. That's great with Metropolitan Water.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
This concludes this episode of the Good Leadership Podcast. If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, it can be found both on Apple and Spotify. It can be also accessed on the Institute for Management Studies website at ims-online.com. Until next time, remember, it's not what you know, but what you do consistently that makes a difference.